Welcome to the Always Becoming podcast with Dr. Lynn Santiago. Dr. Lynn and her guests explore two questions: who am I? And are we always becoming? We all have a becoming story. Be inspired by the personal becoming stories told by guests who share the risks and challenges, the successes and the letdowns, the joys and the heartaches they experience while on their own becoming journey. Here's your host, Dr. Lynn Santiago.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I am so excited to present to you today's guest, Andrea Assaf. Andrea is the founder and executive director of Art to Action. She is also a writer, a performer, and a cultural organizer. Andrea tells us about how she believes that artistic practice helps in the healing process and says that it has saved her own life. You will hear why that is. Andrea's current Becoming chapter is titled From Page to Stage and Back Again. She explains how the pandemic has provided her an opportunity to go back and reclaim that part of her who had always wanted to be a writer. So lockdown has given her this opportunity to do more writing. Because much of Andrea's work over the past 10 years has focused on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, I asked her to share her thoughts about the recent events in Afghanistan. We had a conversation about the effect of the Taliban takeover on the people of Afghanistan, particularly women, and the moral injury the combat vets may now be experiencing. So, without further ado, here's Andrea. Hi, Andrea.
Hello, Lynn. It's so great to see you.
Oh, it's so great to see you again. It's been quite a while, and I'm so excited to be able to have this opportunity to talk with you. I know you've got some really great stuff to say, so I want to thank you so much. I'm really, truly honored that you have agreed to be here today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to see you again, and I feel like I have so much to update you on, so it's going to be exciting.
No, it's got to be. Okay. So you know that my very first question that I ask everybody is, what do you think? Are we always becoming?
Yes, I absolutely do think that. And I also find it fascinating that that's a question for other people because I feel like the only thing that's constant is change, right? And we're always in a state of change, and life changes us so much, so many times. And I'm an artist, I'm a writer, theater director, performer. And so for me, the creative process is always about transforming. It's always about becoming, exploring something new, seeing where that takes you, seeing how it changes you. And so absolutely, I think that's part of my practice constantly as an artist.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm not done yet. I want to keep becoming throughout life, right? I don't want to get stuck.
Sometimes out of fear, we get stuck. And I don't know,
Right.
I see you as a very courageous person. So maybe there are times when you have that kind of that fear, but you push through it and you do it anyway, right? That you keep growing and you keep pushing yourself in your comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. I love pushing the comfort zone, but the fear question is a really good one because sometimes it does get us stuck, and sometimes it's either then when I feel that fear come up, I'm like, okay, I need to check in with myself. Is this something that is telling me there's danger and I need to listen to it? Or is this telling me that the thing I'm afraid of is exactly where I need to go, is exactly what I need to explore and break through? And so I think it's just really important to have that moment with yourself. Like, is this instinct or is this like residual trauma that I need to let go of and move on from? And it's part of the process, right?
Absolutely, it is. Again, I think that we do get stuck when we get stuck in that fear. And a lot of times fear is about loss too, because change a lot of times requires us to give up some things, right?
Yes.
So, or it is, as you say, some of that old stuff that's getting in our way and sort of those old scripts, our old beliefs.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So tell me about, so you are the founder and executive director of Art to Action. Can you share with us what that is?
Sure. Art to Action is a nonprofit arts organization. We're based in Tampa, Florida, although we're originally incorporated in the state of New York. And talk about change and becoming. That was a moment. I had been artistic director at another organization called New World Theater, which was at the University of Massachusetts until 2009. And the university was undergoing a lot of change. Of course, the economy was going under a lot of change in 2009. There was a new chancellor that decided to restructure, and a whole lot of things were happening. And New World Theater, which was a 30-year-old program, the university decided to close it. Well, actually to technically suspend its operations in the short term, but I think we all knew that it would be hard to come back from that. Yeah. And so all of the staff that didn't have seniority at the university, including me, were laid off. And I just thought it was the end of the world. I was a very young leader. I was only, like 34 or something. And it had been my first artistic director position. And I was like, oh my gosh, my career's over. What have I done? What am I going to do?
What kind of choice did I make this? What did I do here?
Right. And so, but when I got myself together through that transition, I decided it was time to start my own organization. And talk about a leap of faith and fear and having to confront what if I fail? What if I succeed? Like all of those really hard questions. But luckily I had a handful of really amazing women, friends and colleagues who were ready to support this journey and signed on as my first board members and helped me create it. And at the same time, my partner got a position at the University of South Florida as a faculty. So that's what brought us to Tampa. And 10 years later, here we are with a thriving and growing, small but growing organization.
Yeah. So then I must have met you just about that time that you started the organization.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to figure it out. I think it was about 9 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think we met maybe in 2013. So I was pretty new at it at that time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to talk more about what your organization actually does and what the focus is and what's kind of new, what's coming up. I'm interested in understanding about reflections in September.
Yes.
So, but I'll ask you about that in a little bit,
okay.
But I want to get to you. I want to understand how, who you are and what your story is about. And so what would you say your current chapter is in your own becoming story?
Oh my goodness. Well, this year, the pandemic has, I would say, thrown the entire field of theater and performance into a tailspin about how are we going to sustain this work if our central value is being live in a room with other people.
Right.
The pandemic has completely turned that upside down and made it impossible and made us wonder, what's the future? And so on the one hand, this new chapter has been about, figuring out the digital world really fast and figuring out how live creative work translates to this new form. And then also really figuring out, when we can gather in space together again, what do we need to do? Because people need to heal. Talk about change and sadness, right? I mean, this has been such a sorrowful time on so many levels. And I really believe that the arts, as you know, have a very strong role in healing.
Yes.
And so I think that this new chapter is about, what is it going to mean to engage community? What is it going to mean to kind of balance now this digital world with, live in-person spaces when that's safe again. And also, interestingly, I discovered about myself that I'm quite fine being reclusive. Like, I didn't know. Performers,
you're not alone.
Performers seem very extroverted, right? I mean, because we're on stage, we're used to lights and applause and all those things. But I actually found out that I'm quite happy being at home and writing and not talking to humans, except for my partner and family, And so that's been a really interesting discovery. And I think it's going to tell me more about my becoming journey going forward.
that is, I don't think you're alone in that at all, as far as people discovering that about themselves, and that they actually, but now that, it's kind of good to have an excuse to be
Right.
realistic,
Right.
But performers, they use a lot of energy. They take, I know it's coming from themselves. And I know at least from what I understand and from some of the things that I have done, that performing actually feeds, right? It's like it feeds energy, it feeds the soul, but it also can be draining too, because you're like connecting with so many people in so many different ways, that having that time to disconnect and be with yourself in your own space. I'd imagine that you would have needed to do that anyway, or not. I'm just assuming.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
No, absolutely. I think any time that it does take a tremendous amount of energy, and it after performing, you feel both kind of exhilarated and exhausted and drained. And when a show closes, there's a thing we call post-show depression, which is very real, because it's like you've poured your heart and soul into creating this thing with other people for an intensive period of time, and then it's just gone. And you have to start over with a new project and a new group of people often. And so definitely there are kind of these cycles. And I think when you're a young artist, for a young actor or performer, it can be like very dramatic and disorienting. And as you gain experience, you kind of mature into understanding how to handle and process the cycles. And that as you get older, you need a daily practice. Like you can't just, be as agile. I can't, as I was in my 20s. And now, daily yoga practice is really important. I try to keep a daily journaling practice, or walks, or something meditative in my day. Because balancing energy and harvesting energy is really important, and also taking care of our bodies as we age.
Yeah. So that self-care that everybody, we all need, in some degree or another. Oh, yeah. Well, what is the title of your current kind of chapter? I got to ask you that.
Oh, right. So we were talking about this idea of from page to stage and back again, which has to do with what I said about the pandemic, about kind of rediscovering my writer self and my writer voice and my goals for myself as a writer. I sometimes joke that I think theater was like this, 20 or 30 year divergent. Like I got diverted down this path that became my career. But I think I've always been a writer since I was a very young child. And before I discovered theater, my dreams had to do with being a writer. And then the excitement of the theater, I think, kind of swept me off my feet. And I've done that for years. But now I'm like, oh, well, with all these questions that the pandemic raises and my own health and self-care and thinking about aging in the future, I'm like, oh, maybe I need to reclaim my writer self and focus on that more, nurture that more.
I love that. Reclaim that part of yourself. I think that is absolutely part of the becoming journey, that and our becoming story, that there are times when we realize and recognize that we've left a part of us behind and that it's important to go back and reclaim that part of us. You said that art, and I believe you said art is a form of healing or a way to heal. Can you share what you mean by that a little bit?
Yeah, I can share that by way of my personal story, and then some of the work that I do that you've been familiar with. I really believe that I grew up with a lot of family dysfunction, as many people did. I had a lot of alcoholism and drug addiction in my family, and a lot of violence in my family. And I was a very, I was a young person, I'm thinking like high school age, who was having a lot of, I think, emotional challenges and acting out a lot, and dealing with a lot of anger, and definitely trauma that I had no words for. And finding theater finding a place where I could, scream and cry and play and explore and be other people and imagine other futures and other histories and embody those. It really was, I really quite honestly sometimes think that it saved my life because, and I say that because I had at the time a friend that I grew up with who wanted to be an artist, a visual artist, and she never had the support in her life to do that, from emotional support or actual ability to go in that direction. And she did take her own life when we were 21 years old. Oh. And she also had been dealing with a lot of violence in her family, and she had suicidal ideation since she was very young, since she was a young teenager. And so I often think about that. I often think about if she had that outlet, if she had been able to follow her dreams, if she'd had the support to go in that direction, would it have healed her in the way that I think that it did heal me? Yeah. So as I've become not only a creator myself, but also a facilitator of community-based process where I support other people's creative process and finding their voice and telling their stories, really. I have seen again and again and again how artistic practice helps with the healing process. It's not enough by itself often. It's not all you need, but it can be a tremendously powerful and transformative component of healing.
I saw you, with your work with veterans.
Yes.
Right. And you talk about, giving them the opportunity to tell their story. Right. Are you still doing that work?
Well, I'm glad that you asked because the Veterans Community Open Mic, which was a monthly program that Art to Action was hosting with several partners, went on hiatus during the pandemic. And we tried doing it online for a bit, which was challenging. We got Zoom bombed before I even knew what that was. It's a mess. And we had some really wonderful online sessions, but I realized that people were sometimes sharing stories that they clearly needed more support to share. And I just felt like everyone's so isolated right now and we can't be in a real space together. And I don't know, there's no way to follow up. I don't know what happens after they turn off the Zoom. And I thought, well, maybe this isn't safe. Maybe this isn't the right thing to do right now. So we closed it. And I thought, well, that was a good run. We had several years. It was an amazing community we built. It was a great program. Maybe it's just time. Now that we're all thinking about emerging from the pandemic, suddenly everybody's like, when is the Veterans Open Mic? And even the Florida Division of Arts and Culture contacted us to see if they could support bringing back the Veterans Community Open Mic with their NEA partnership Creative Forces. So we're talking to new partners, and it's a little too soon to announce it, but we are aiming for an October relaunch. Maybe not monthly, but at least quarterly. So please stay tuned for the
absolutely.
And that's open to veterans and civilians. Part of the point is to break our, silos and isolation and hear each other's stories.
Right. Now, I first met you when I went to see the performance of Speed Killed My Cousin.
Yes.
Right.
Linda Paris Bailey. Yes.
And just how profound and moving that production was, that, the story was. I'm assuming you're not doing that anymore.
It's not touring anymore. In fact, Linda Paris Bailey, the playwright, retired from her company, the Company Theater. And so I'm not sure if we'll have the opportunity to tour that piece anymore. But
did you film it? Did you record it so that it can be shown to others who hadn't seen it?
Recording live theater is very difficult. We do have recordings, but they're not quite satisfying as film. I think that would be a great future thing to do, to document that piece too.
I know, because it just seems like, now it's just stopped and what?
Yeah.
It's like it's alive. Like, it's like
now
it dies. Like
about,
people need to see it. More people need to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm starting to think about other ways to get, works that are not able to tour in a pandemic environment out there, like publishing or digital versions, or yeah, it's a time of both challenge creatively and what do they say? Challenge is necessity is the mother of invention, but challenges kind of push us to.
If we didn't have challenge, there would be no growth, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. But yeah, the veteran work was working with the veteran community. I'm not a veteran myself. I'm Arab American. And it was, I learned so much, partly from you, Lynn, actually, and your reflections on that piece, to really help me understand the concept of moral injury and the role that it plays, and therefore the role that it plays in mental health, but therefore also the role that the ways that it can be addressed, creatively in telling those stories that we hide, and the healing that starts once you begin to, reveal those hidden stories. And this question of moral injury is something that I'm continuing to explore in my next play, actually, which is
Drone.
Yes.
I knew it was going to be that. I knew it was like, oh my God, this is a moral injury thing for sure.
Yeah, totally.
But, I think I have wanted to ask you this question, and I think this is a perfect time to do it. As far as any thoughts that you have about what's going on currently in Afghanistan, because I know that has been something that has really kind of moved me, and moral injury is like one of the things that come up for me when I think about it. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is such a tragic situation. The images that we're seeing right now are so reminiscent of the U.S. Departure from Vietnam.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Just like, did we learn nothing? Like, it's so frustrating to see history repeating itself in such a painful way. And also, we're just a few weeks away from the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and the invasion of the U.S., invasion of Afghanistan, and the war in Afghanistan, which is the U.S.'s longest war in American history. And it just makes you wonder, with the Taliban coming back into power so quickly, why did we do it? What did we accomplish?
Right.
Why so much suffering, both on the part of our own veterans and people who served, and then of course the civilians in Afghanistan, and I just, every time, the Taliban, it's like The Handmaid's Tale. It's like watching The Handmaid's Tale. You know what I mean? It's just knowing what it's going to mean for women again is so heartbreaking, and really makes me feel like we didn't really care about women to begin with. Like, I know that was part of our official story of why we went to Afghanistan. But in fact, I don't think that we ever really cared enough. And so all of that is very, very heartbreaking for me.
Yeah, my immediate thing was about the moral injury from military combat vets, because I remember when I was teaching about moral injury, I had a reservist come up to me afterwards and said, I never knew what was going on until I heard your presentation. Now I know it was moral injury. And he shared his story about how he never had any real direct fire, but one of his missions was to go into a village and clear it out of all the people that live there. And he was told the reason was because they needed to create an outpost there. And so he was able to justify it by telling himself that there was a good purpose to it, and that it was part of the mission, but there was a good purpose when it comes from his, but, we're talking about home invasion basically. And when, home invasion here is, you'd wind up many, many years in prison. Right. But what really struck him and what caused the moral injury was when he found out that they never even used the that village as they had intended to. And then it hit him that he had done all of that for nothing. Right? Like he transgressed his own moral values, first believing that there was a reason and a good enough reason, but then to find out that there was no purpose to it. And that really crippled him. And that's what I'm thinking about now when I think about all of the, the military, the service members, the family members. We're talking about 20,000 service members were injured. It was like in Afghanistan, I think it was like 13 or 1,500 killed, and that's not even including the suicides that happened afterwards, right? Those that came back and took their own lives. So I'm just really concerned about some of those service members now sitting back going, what was that about? Why did I do that? Why did my buddy die for that?
I was thinking about that this morning, like really just everybody who served there, how they must be feeling, and the like profound sense of contradiction, if not cognitive dissonance, that it's causing. And also for all the Afghanis who supported the American forces and who worked with us and who, whose lives are now in danger because they worked with us.
And they were at risk then. I mean, you're talking about like putting their lives and their own families at risk during that time and serving, and serving us and helping us with that and helping their own country. But I'm glad that it's something that we're having this interview today, because I know about, your background and your interest in these things. And so to be able to ask you, I'm glad. Thank you so much for sharing what your thoughts are.
Sure. As an Arab American, I always kind of see the situation from both sides, both from the U.S. Side and, culturally and politically, and then also from the side of the people who are on the receiving end of what I think is still colonial behavior, is still, colonialism and imperialism, like that, the story that you told, just moving people out of their homes that they've probably been in for thousands of years. I mean, the amounts of time that we can't even comprehend as, Americans in the US, that, unless we have, Indigenous heritage or First Peoples or Native American heritage, we can't comprehend those time spans of being connected to a place, a land, a community. And that it's so, I just think that the way that we handled Afghanistan particularly, and also Iraq, but especially Afghanistan, it just, rather than creating peace, we've just created more animosity and more desperation, and therefore more quote unquote enemies who really have no other option. I mean, they have no access to education. They have no other job opportunities. If you're from this rural place that's been destroyed and the only one offering you a job is the Taliban, and you're, 18, what are you going to do?
Right. Oh my gosh.
So I think that we have to think about these things much more holistically and systemically. It's not really about that someone wants to be the enemy of the United States or even the Afghan government, but what options realistically do people have? And if we're not trying to fix those root cause problems, then we're just never going to get anywhere.
Right. So I want to know more about your becoming story. We kind of got off there, and I think it was important to talk about. But I'm curious as to what's going on now in your life. What is kind of revealing itself as your becoming journey is moving forward?
Well, before we entirely leave that topic, I have to say that it is connected because one of the things that created a lot of change in my life was the experience of 9/11. I was a New Yorker at the time. Ironically, I had just moved back to New York from Washington, D.C. on September 1st, 2001.
Oh,
I had been a
wow.
New Yorker before, and then I had this apprenticeship in DC, and then I came back to New York, and 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And so it was profound for me as a New Yorker, but also as an Arab American, because I barely had time to process as a New Yorker before I was having to deal with the backlash. And I was a very young artist at that time, and I was really kind of finding my voice and figuring out what my work was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that irrevocably shaped, all the work that I've done since, which has mostly been about war and peace primarily. And so now we're approaching the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and this piece that I created called 11 Reflections on September, which is about that whole journey of being Arab American post 9/11, has found a new life, because we were supposed to be doing a live performance at the Carver Community Cultural Center in San Antonio, in Texas, last year. And of course, that wasn't possible. So we turned it into a digital. We thought we were trying to figure out how to do digital performance, but we wound up making essentially an art film, which has gone on to win some accolades in film festivals. But so what's exciting about that is that as 9/11 approaches and we think about how to commemorate the 20th anniversary, for me, what's important is not to look only at that moment, but everything that it triggered, everything that followed, including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and all the policies that have unfolded in the last 20 years as well. So I'm very excited that piece is going to have multiple lives. And if it's possible to travel, I'll be in Texas doing an in-person residency and doing workshops and story circles with people around the topic of 9/11, but also the digital film is going to be available through the Arab American National Museum, September 9th through 12th. It'll be available on demand online. And on 9/11 in New York City, Rattlestick Playwrights Theater is doing a live outdoor performance vigil. And there's some just wonderful, extraordinary actors who are going to read from the script in my absence, so that people who are in New York can actually go in person and be part of that vigil outdoors, hopefully as safely as possible. So that's kind of most immediately on my mind.
So I'm gonna have all your information, your contact information in the podcast, the episode description. So anybody who is interested and wants to learn more about this project and about how they can actually watch it, that'll be there for them. Hey,
thank you.
Okay. But you shared with me that there was other things going on in your life, and I know that was an important part of what's happening as far as, again, where you are and how your life is unfolding. And I really want to, be able to talk just a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And I know you have something to share, which I really want to hear.
I do. Well, can I share it first and talk about it after?
Yes.
That might be a good way to go.
Yes.
Wow, that was an incredible interview and clearly synchronistic, given the events of the Taliban takeover just the day before the recording of this interview. You can learn more about Andrea's work at www.art2action.org, and you can watch that art film that she talked about, 11 Reflections on September. It will be streaming September 9th to the 12th at the ArabAmericanMuseum.org website. Also want to remind you, do not miss part 2 of Andrea's interview, where she talks about a recent diagnosis with a rare autoimmune disorder, ankylosing spondylitis, Litis. Okay. I am so sorry. I have tried over and over and over and over again to pronounce that. I'm sure I am not the only one who gets tongue-tied when trying to say that word. In any case, she does share for the first time a very powerful poem that she wrote while about the disorder and its relationship with COVID vaccine. The poem is titled Dear Vaccine. Andrea closes with a quote by poet Adrienne Rich. What we see, and seeing is changing. Remember these words as you are moving along in your becoming process and in your transformation as it is unfolding this week. Thank you for listening to Always Becoming Podcast. Follow me on Instagram for daily words of wisdom and inspiring becoming stories at becoming_with_Dr. Lynn. That is LYNNE. Subscribe for this podcast so you can be notified of all new episodes. I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you.